Hi everybody, hopefully the construction doesn't get too loud out there while I'm recording this. There are a couple things I wanted to film this week that I just didn't because they've been non-stop whenever I'm home during the sort of the middle of the day. I'm pretty busy usually in the mornings and then in the evenings till about like 7, 8 o'clock, whatever, but yeah, they've just been crazy loud. I worked on some other things instead, which I guess is good. So didn't get to go ahead with videos, but I wanted to come out and film this one just because occasionally I like to do just kind of a casual vlog type thing and talk about some games I've been playing that either didn't necessarily come out as a review or anything like that, just kind of playing for fun. With especially because the upcoming Xenoblade Chronicles 2 release day, which is tomorrow as I'm recording this, I've been replaying Xenoblade Chronicles for the fourth time now, and this time I actually decided to sit down and do something that I normally don't do. I've only done it with maybe 2 or 3 games ever since I was a kid, and did a 100% run. That's just not normally something I really do, particularly with RPGs. I'm really in it for the story and to explore the world and go through all of that, and I do the side quests and side mini games and whatever that I kind of really think are fun or have an attachment to, or if they build to the story. I really never try to just like 100% complete things. Not really something that's up my alley, but I wanted to do it at least once with Xenoblade Chronicles since it is my favorite game of all time. You know, surpassed things that were up there for over a decade, some of them 2 decades in my top 10, and just went past all of them to my number 1, which is why I'm super excited for Xenoblade Chronicles 2. And I say 100% run, there is one achievement I did not do. Simply because, in a way, I was almost too efficient to have to do it. There is a 365-day achievement where you have to go through basically a full year worth of time in game, like the number of hours, and then it comes to like 180, 190 hours or whatever of playtime to unlock that achievement. And that's the one thing I didn't, because I was nowhere near that doing my 100% run, and I'm not just gonna like leave the Wii on and wander around, you know, by honest for like 20, 30 hours just to get an achievement. So I'm calling it 100%, even though I didn't get that one thing, because yeah, that's just not worth it. Wasting, you know, the laser and everything like that. And the only reason I was able to do that was because this was my 4th time through. I played it when I first got it through normally, and I spent about 120 hours my first playthrough, and then I ended up doing 2 more playthroughs as a New Game Plus, and one time I just went through, did a story run, and did that in about 30 hours. Another time I went through and did all kinds of side quests and exploration and things that I had missed in those first 2 playthroughs. And that way, in this playthrough, I really sat down and I'm like, this is what I want to do, this is my goal, and I got to plan things out in my mind. And having played through so much of it before, and even gotten to the point where I had almost completed Colony 6 in my first playthrough, like I just had a few things left to do. I had already solved a lot of stuff with like the Giant's Tombs and things like that. I'd done so much of it before that I could really plan out and know as I was doing things, alright, I unlocked this, I don't want to do it yet because I know if I do this, that'll complete it anyway in the meantime, and I know like where certain like side quests would start a chain of quests that would lead to another chain of quests and that different thing, and having that in my mind, and knowing that I just wanted to do this once and not having a ton of time to play games. So this took like 5 or 6 months for me to do because I really don't have that much time, many weeks to really get into it. That I could plan ahead so much that there was a section later on where I just had a string of quests, like close to 100 quests that were like almost done, where I just either needed to like return to someone, or I had like one thing out of 4 things they had to collect, or a whole string of those, to where I blasted through 100 quests in like 5 or 6 hours that were almost done and just needed this little bit of cleanup, and did things as I went. I knew before getting to the Mika's Core event what I wanted to have done before I got to that point, and what's unlocked afterwards, that kind of thing. So I was able to do it pretty efficiently and much faster, only because I knew the game so well. It's the only reason I was able to do it so quickly. I had a lot of fun. I'll never do that again. The 100% run is just crazy. But in the meantime, too, what also helped make it take a little bit longer, too, was if you've been watching my channel, I did reviews recently, played through Silent Hill 2 for the first time ever. Did a review of that and Alan Wake. So I did play a couple games, and I did play a couple other games just kind of for fun, like some fighting games and things, while I was doing that the past like 5 or 6 months. So it may take a little bit longer. The other thing too is I played through a little bit of stuff from the recent Black Friday video. One, again, that is sort of a replay of a game I played before, which made me play through more quickly, was Lara Croft Tomb Raider Legend, which I had beaten on the PS2 quite a few years ago now. And I played the first couple levels on the GameCube version. And so I knew kind of what I was doing, but this still actually took me longer to beat on this version than my original playthrough on the PS2, even though I pretty much knew what I was doing, because this was a fun yet frustrating experience. It's actually a really impressive port. Graphically, it's definitely inferior to other versions, but especially with the withdrawal distance, I think that was a big thing. And sort of the edges kind of aren't quite as sharp, and little bits of detail, but it looks fantastic, especially on that screen. I mean, if you have a portable version, it's more than competent visually. Looks great, sounds great. The one issue is with the controls, because using an actual analog stick versus basically that little analog nub on the PSP, it's very different. It's not quite as accurate, and for a game that's largely about very accurate jumping and things like that, that made it more, like, artificially more difficult than the game actually is. And the other thing with the camera controls, because you cannot really move and control the camera at the same time, with the exception of hitting the L trigger to move the camera back behind you. You can do that, but otherwise you have to hold down, you have to press square and then use the analog stick to control the camera, and then you let go of square and just use the analog stick to move around. And that made things very difficult. They're very difficult because there were certain instances throughout the game where I really wanted to be able to move and control the camera at the same time, or switch more quickly than you actually could, and that made certain things more difficult to accomplish, or not being quite as accurate with the little analog nub, to where occasionally I'd miss a jump, just simply because I just couldn't quite feel as accurate and in control as in other versions. It felt very clunky in that way. And there were, again, some specific instances where it was a huge problem, like the boss at the end of the Tokyo level, where you're pretty much climbing up to this top level and he's shooting things at you, and you're going around kind of in a big circle basically, and hiding behind certain things, and then attacking him when he's when you can actually target him and things like that. And he's not really that difficult in other versions. This, though, because you can't really control the camera very well as you're moving, or switch between movement and camera control very quickly, if you're going around in a circle like that, half the time I couldn't see him at all. I'd be like facing the outside wall, or at a weird angle to where, like, I can't quite get to the point where I'm facing him. And even, tapping, L1, trying to get the camera right behind my character as you're going around a circle, it still wasn't quite as accurate, and that was so frustrating, just because the camera was like, and the controls. So it was a very frustrating experience, just because it didn't control anywhere near as efficiently as the other versions. But again, it is still a very fun, competent port, and it's a great game overall. And it's definitely, an inferior version, but still a fun version if you have it, or if you see it to pick up. It's still a really, really great game. Just has some complicated control issues. And I played through a few hours of Counterforce, and this was a lot of fun. It was a little, like, budget game. I think it was like 99 cents. And the Wii actually has a lot of these little budget games that are the under $5 mark now for used ones. Even the list gets bigger at the under the 5 to 10 mark there. A lot of these that are they're hard to find, because a lot of them, there weren't a ton of them made, and every time I walk into stores now, even little mom and pop shops with lots of used Wii games, it's the same stuff. It's Nintendo things, or really popular things, or just all the trash that people think of when they think of the Wii, all that garbage. And there are a lot of little hidden gems in the system that are just hard to find copies of, even if they aren't expensive. And this is one of them that I never ever see. And again, it's like $1 game, but it's a fun little arcade game. It's something that I really like about the Wii. Yeah, you basically just fly, the choice of 3 mechs that you fly around these arcade levels, and it's pretty much like a light gun game. You can actually control the movement of your mech a little bit within the stage. It feels sort of like it's almost like an inferior version of the Panzer Dragoon games in a way, that it controls, and it's a lot of just fun. It looks like an early PS2 game, even though it's a Wii game. There are only a handful of levels. You only have a handful of choices of different mech suits, and they're very traditional. Like, one is more balanced, one is more heavy fire but slow, the other one's really fast but is a little bit easier to destroy, doesn't do quite as much damage. Very, very standard in many different ways, but at the same time, it's just a fun little arcade game. Sometimes I want that. Sometimes I don't want a big meaty game to spend 10, 20, 30, Xenoblade 150 hours and whatever. Sometimes I just want to sit with a game for an hour and have fun playing an arcade game, and this really fits the bill perfectly. And again, it's a super cheap game when you find it. It's just a fun little arcade shooter. There's not a lot to it, and it's not a perfect game, but it's just a fun arcadey experience, and I like that. And this week too, I was able to finish reading a book which I just don't have as much time as I'd like to be able to sit and read so frequently. So it was nice to be able to sit and just kind of read something for fun, just between playing those games and not really have time to film. I did some writing this week a little bit. I went to the gym a couple times, which I had been neglecting for months. Got to finish reading a book, so it's even though the construction's been annoying, haven't been able to film too much. It's not too bad right now, thankfully. Out of nowhere as I film a random video. But I was able to read The Lawless Decade: A Pictorial History of the 20s by Paul Sand. And this was a really, really good book if you are already someone who is familiar with the decade and a lot of the events and people involved, because it's very, very dense and fast-paced as far as throwing tons and tons of names at you and events and things like that, that I feel like it gives you a lot of great information, but for someone who is not very familiar with a lot of aspects and individual names and events of the decade already, it's not as good of a read because it's a little too dense in that area. There's a little bit too much of a barrier of entry to enjoy it, because while things are explained very, very well, and there's so much detail thrown at you and so many specifics and such a fast pace that it's very dense with information about the entire decade in a book that's really not all that long. I mean, it's really, there's a lot to it, but there's just so much that I feel like you already have to be aware of a lot of the decade and already be a fan of the 20s to really get the most out of this book. So a really good book that I would suggest if you already are a fan of that decade, but probably not the best sort of introductory thing. So I really did enjoy it. It took a long time to get through just because even though I'm very familiar with the decade, there's a whole lot of I really want to sit and maybe do extra research outside of the book about certain people that, I hadn't heard that name before or something. A good experience, but that's pretty much what I've been up to recently. As far as what I've been even just watching recently, a lot of times you're getting most of that anyway on my weekly Laser Talk stuff, and I have a bunch filmed out through the end of January pretty much already at this point. And on top of that, watching random stuff, with my wife, YouTube videos and episodes of the original Star Trek and things, and sort of my nighttime staples too. The past year or so, when I'm just home and it's 8, maybe 9 o'clock at night, you're gonna have dinner and just want to watch something for an hour or so before you're going to bed. The normal staples for me have been MASH and Bewitched and the Dick Van Dyke Show. I'm watching a lot of that, or I've been watching some I Love Lucy occasionally now. Occasionally, I get great for just a half hour of fun when you have the time. But watching a lot more from the 50s through 70s lately, just been kind of, I don't know, just something that's been the kind of entertainment I've been wanting to get into. And then of course the Orville every week. So by the time this goes up, there will be another episode of the Orville later tonight, which I'll, as normal, watch Friday afternoon and put up a review of that. So make sure you check back Friday or Saturday for that review, plus a new weekly Laser Talk is coming out tomorrow if you're watching this Thursday, and as soon as I get my copy in the mail, I'll be doing an unboxing of the Xenoblade Chronicles 2 limited edition. If you haven't watched a million of those already, I'm sure a bunch are going up today and tomorrow. I'll be doing one of those just because I can't wait. It looks so absolutely awesome. But yeah, it's kind of just a gist of what I've been doing, particularly entertainment-wise lately.